saludo muy especial, compañeros, compañeras, profesoras de la enseñanza al inglés. Primero agradecerles participar en esta capacitación, que es una capacitación que su contenido hoy tiene una relevancia mucho más importante en el contexto que estamos de la pandemia. Desarrollar habilidades para el trabajo con las tecnologías de la información y apropiarse de las tecnologías para el trabajo que cada uno y cada uno de ustedes desarrollan es de vital importancia hoy más que nunca. Agradecerle también a los colaboradores que han hecho posible esta capacitación para ustedes, a la Alianza para el Bilingüismo, a la Embajada de los Estados Unidos, que siempre ha venido apoyando al Ministerio de Educación Pública con diferentes estrategias, a National English Advisor, al Instituto para el Aprendizaje Colaborativo. Recordemos, Costa Rica ha puesto la fe y la esperanza en el proyecto de una educación bilingüe, en una Costa Rica bilingüe para el 2040, y parte de esas estrategias es ese camino hacia esa educación bilingüe que se merece, necesita y requiere nuestro país. Muchas gracias por eso, una nueva felicitación, gracias por todo ese trabajo que hacen ustedes en las aulas que hacen la diferencia de la educación en este país.
Welcome to these trainings that are coordinated by the Ministry of Public Education, the U.S. Embassy, and the great support of our national English advisors. These trainings are also provided by experts of the Institute for Collaborative Learning. These professional development experiences will help you explore new methodologies, new ideas, and to develop new skills in order to enhance the continuity of learning process of your students. You will also have the chance to develop new ideas and new approaches for distance learning. We hope you will find wonderful opportunities to grow in terms of professional development, and you will enjoy and share experiences with other partners. Have fun!
And I'd like to invite our working group, the people that helped make this happen, Rocio Chavez, Ofelia Montelia Garcia, and Adriana Diaz Madriz. You guys just raise the little wave, and Ana Campos and Jauri Ramirez a little wave, and myself, Mary Scholl, Ivan Suazo, Matt Schaefer, Roger Ramirez, and Nicolas Cardenas. You guys just a wave. These are the people that have been working to make this day happen. And we are so grateful to be able to work with you all. But I would like to introduce all of you to Matt Schaefer, who's going to be our main speaker today, and start out this morning with little ears and big learning. Matt, you want to take it away?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'd say it's nice to hear you, but if I could hear all of you, I'd hear crazy echoes through everyone's microphone, and that might not be too nice. But it's nice to know that you're all out there. And know that we're together this morning. I think it's really nice to share time and space in this big public way. We're close to 300. So I'm going to get started with our presentation, but I just wanted to start out by thanking you for being with me. I'm currently calling in from Northern California. I'll flip my camera around really quick. You can see my backyard. If any deer come through, I'll keep the nature cam going so we can spice things up a bit. But today I'm going to be talking about a few topics with all of you. Let me get my screen share going. Wait, there it is. So, little ears, big learning. Today we're going to be talking about phonological and phonemic awareness in the morning. And then this afternoon we'll talking about storytelling. And we'll be localizing both of those topics specifically in preschool education. I think there are pieces of those themes that can apply and come up in any kind of learning. But I really want to focus on how these affect our young learners in our preschool classrooms. And especially, I know some of the population with us today are former and current elementary school teachers who are just getting ready to start their journey of working in preschool education as we make a move towards bilingualism in the country. So that's super exciting. And that's part of my own journey too. So I will share some of my experiences making that transition from teaching elementary schoolers and coming into preschool as well. So for those of you who are looking not only to hear about maybe new strategies and techniques, but to think about adapting your ideas from one context to another, I'll try and touch on some of those topics as well. I want to make a quick note about that title, Little Ears, Big Learning. I like the way it sounds. It's kind of funny. When I was in university, I studied poetry. But to me, it speaks to something a little bit deeper. One thing I've noticed living and teaching in Costa Rica, in San Carlos, in Alinbu de Peñas Blancas, for the last 5 years, as I've been developing my own Spanish language ability, is the chiquitito, right? The way that especially Costa Rican Spanish has this very wonderfully particular way of diminutizing things. And I found that that was especially the case in the preschool classroom, right? Especially when all of the chiquitititos that we're with are so ititito. And yet at the same time, I realized that what I was seeing happening around me was really fundamental, big learning, right? That it might feel like, and it might look like some of my friends that all I do is sit around and finger paint all day, and what I'm really doing is glorified babysitting. But I know from studying the theories inside of these learnings that some of these topics are as fundamental as helping our young children, the children of our country, learn to hear better, right? Learn to interact with other people. So I really want to contrast those two ideas, right? On the one side, we see our learners as so small. And yet on the other side, the learnings that we can observe in this space can be huge. And that brings me to the next bit I want to share, which is a little bit about myself. Because we can't be in the same physical space, I do want to take some time to give you a window into who I am that will hopefully let you connect with me and hear where my ideas are coming from as I share with you for the rest of the day. My name is Matt. I was born and raised in California, and it's where I'm currently at right now with my family, up in the mountains on a lake. And I moved to Costa Rica 5 years ago to get the TESOL certificate course at Centro Espiral Mana. And I fell in love with the country and the nature and a beautiful dog. And I've been living and working there ever since. In that time, I've been teaching English to students between the ages of 3 and 73. So my experience has me working all over. And it was in Costa Rica that I actually started working in preschools for the first time. And I have a really strong memory of my first 6 months getting up at 5:30 a.m. to take the bus into La Fortuna, to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for a classroom of tiny, tiny, tiny little students. And I remember really distinctly from that first 6 months feeling like I was a bad teacher. I'd been teaching for 5 or 6 years in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, even with adults for some time. And when I got to preschool, I felt I have no idea what I'm doing, right? I felt like I was going in and I would plan my lessons and I'd plan 2 hours of content and it would pass by in 10 minutes and I'd have nothing to do. And then other days I'd plan 10 minutes and it would last for 2 hours. And whatever I might go into the classroom with my expectations of what I thought my students might do, they never seemed to be quite meeting them. And it made me feel doubtful of myself, doubtful if what I was doing had a benefit on my students. And then one day we were out by our glorious play, and I was observing what was going on recess, making sure no one was putting anything inappropriate in their mouths. And one of my students, she was alone in a classroom of 10 other 3- and 4-year-old boys, and she was just about to turn 3. So, she's smaller than everyone else, younger than everyone else, the only girl in the class, and was usually very quiet and off to the side during classroom activities. She came up to me at recess and she said, she looked at me, she looked at the slide, and she looked at me again, and she just said, "Green." And it shocked me. Here I was standing there, having just finished my lesson, thinking, I don't know if anyone's learning anything. And a student who'd been in my classroom for 6 months, almost entirely silent, came up to me without being asked and had started using the languages of colors to describe the world around her to me without ever being asked. And that moment's been really big for me in my experience with preschool. As my time has gone on working with those wonderful students in that age, I realized that what was happening is I was bringing my expectations from the other classes that I've worked and learned in. I was thinking about what learning looks like for 10-year-olds, for 15-year-olds, for 30-year-olds. When I went into the classroom, I was bringing those same expectations for my 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 2-year-olds. If I invited them to an activity and didn't hear anyone speaking, I felt it's not working. And it took some time to really get into that sense of thinking, what does learning look like in a preschool setting, right? Let me think about, what am I trying to teach? And what are the ways that my students can show me that they're developing? Because I can have a student who can be silent for 6 months, but we know linguistically that there is a silent period, right? And a 3-year-old who's so much closer to the silent period in their own first language is much more likely to go back to that comfortable zone of just listening and taking in a lot of input before they speak up in a new language again. So thinking about that, thinking about what we're looking for when we learn, I want to give you all an idea of what to be looking for today, and what I hope to share with you all, and what I hope we can talk about and share. So this morning, we're going to start out with a quick conversation about our short and long-term goals for our students. Thinking again about what it is we're desiring for them to learn, and how in every single class we're taking steps to get there. We'll do a review of some of the key terms of phonological and phonemic awareness. I always mix those two words up, and some of the related vocabulary, and I want to make sure that we're all sharing some language before we get into some more theory. Then I'll present some more theory of phonological and phonemic awareness. We'll do sample activities. We'll talk about guidelines for planning and leading activities. And we'll finish up the morning going over some resources, different websites that have lists of activities, a few sample packets and things that can be sent home and shared with parents, some digital and technological resources as well. So that'll be the morning. In the afternoon, we'll move on to the topic of storytelling. We'll think a little bit about how and why we tell stories, the 4 quadrants of storytelling. Again, talk about some high and low tech resources for storytelling, and finish up with an end of day survey. A quick note, I saw a question in the chat earlier about, is this being recorded? Yes, we are planning on sharing with you as much material from this presentation as possible. So this entire PowerPoint that you're viewing right now, the PowerPoint from the afternoon, all of the extra materials, the video from the session, everything will be available at this link right here. We'll get that link sent out in the chat as well, both now, in the middle of the day and at the end of the day, to make sure you have access to that. I want to make sure that you know that if I happen to be moving at a slightly different pace and you were wanting 30 seconds more to read through a slide, you can come back to this and look through it at your own pace. One of the challenges of working in this digital space is I don't get the feedback of looking around the room and to everyone's eyes and seeing, have people stopped reading? Have they started looking at their phones? Are they ready to move on? Because we're all already looking at our phones. So I wanted to make sure that you know that all of these materials will be available to you. And in addition, if there's anything else that you need from us, please feel free to reach out. Our mission here at the Institute for Collaborative Learning is to collaborate with you today and share as much as we can. So what I hope for today. First, I hope we take care of ourselves as learners and as human beings. That is one of my intentions whenever I walk into the classroom. I think before my learning objectives, I want to make sure everyone's surviving, right? Everyone's meeting their basic human needs. One of the things I want to make sure that we're doing in terms of that as we're all in this new space and this new learning environment, I know that oftentimes being set up in front of a computer leads to a habit of work where we sit all day and we bend our back in just the same way, and we have our hands just right. And by the end of the day, we start feeling, sore, and your eyes feel strained. And so I want to make sure we're taking time throughout today to really be taking care of our bodies as well. So I've got a little timer here on my watch going that just went off, so that about every 20 minutes that we're together, we take a break and just consciously make sure we're taking an opportunity to move. So I want to invite you all with me. I'm not going to ask anyone to turn on your camera and prove it. If you're tired and don't want to, this is just an option. But if you'd like to take a moment to just stand up, move your body, maybe walk around the room a little bit. One guideline I've heard is that if you're working and looking at something very close to you, like a screen, every 20 minutes, you want to spend 20 seconds focusing on something 20 feet away. That's 7 meters. I'm sorry, it doesn't sound as good when it's 2027, even though feet are crazy, bear with me. So I'm looking out my window, I've got a tree about 20 feet away. I'm just gonna focus for about 20 seconds. And I'll just check in periodically. I won't talk you through this like I'm your PE gym coach every single time. I just wanna make that intention of taking care of ourselves clear, right? And so please, that means if you need to be eating or snacking as you go, I've got a water bottle and some snacks nearby too. I'll try and make sure my mic is muted so you're not listening to me chew. But please take care of yourselves. And if there's anything you need to help take care of yourself that we can help you with, let us know in the chat. You can either send that to everyone or to any of the hosts privately. I hope that we finish today inspired and excited to keep teaching, right? One of the things that really draws me to this profession is how it's a balance of being an artist and being a scientist and being a public servant. How as an artist, I get to design these really rich classes and materials and experiences for people and help them learn. And as a scientist, I can apply elements of pedagogies and neuroscience, thinking about how to make it the most effective. And as a public servant, I can do it for other people. And so I really want to make sure that we finish today inspired to try new things, inspired to keep dedicating ourselves to those wonderful missions. So I hope that something you hear today gives you some idea of something you might try to develop your art of teaching in new ways. And finally, I hope that we approach new ideas with the curiosity of, how can I make this work in my context? I know that the current global health situation that we're all living puts a pressure on us as educators. We have this really incredibly important role to society. And the way that we know how to do that is something we can't currently do. Coming together in a classroom and creating this beautifully messy chaos that is preschool and building learning out of that is something that we have to abstain from a moment for the health of our students. And so I really want to also challenge all of us to start with, how can we make this possible? I think there's so much today telling us what isn't possible. You can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do that. That I want to have us start the conversation from, what can we do? How could we make this possible, right? Maybe this can't work with my students right now, but how could I bend it a little bit to fit into my context? So those are some of my intentions and hopes for today. I also hope that at any moment in time, if you have any questions, send them out in the chat. I've got your chat up here so I can be seeing what you're saying as we go. So if you want to hear more about something, if you have a question, I'll take some time at the end and we can unmute the mics and we can talk back and forth a little bit. But do feel free to send out any questions you have to the chat. I'd love to interact with you all as much as possible while balancing the technical challenges of being together. So let's start with a quote. Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare it for today. I love this quote. I think, the powerful use of passport in there really is amplified when I think about the population that we're working with, and how by giving our students who are growing up in this international hub of travel of Costa Rica, the ability to speak multiple languages really gives them this passport, right? It gives them this power. And I think about how much that can be, right? And especially because I'm not deciding what English will be for them. I'm not deciding you will be a tour guide, you will work in customer service, right? I'm helping my student acquire a power that will one day let them make choices for themselves and give them this passport to opportunity. And I want to lay that into a question for all of you. What future do we want for our students? As we think about those little tiny students climbing onto the bus, if we see in that top left there, on maybe their first day of school, they're nervous, mom's even more nervous sending the child off onto the bus, and how that little child slowly grows bigger and bigger and is learning how to do things, learning how to do and build things on their own, becoming and connecting with their friends, starting to express themselves and dye their hair awful colors, growing up wearing weird costumes, growing bangs way too long, but slowly and surely becoming an adult, becoming able to decide who they will become, right? As we think about that journey, and we think that that journey lies in front of every little student that we have that walks into our classroom, every pair of little ears that we work with is going to grow up and become a human being deciding things and who they want to be. I want to ask you the question, what long-term aspirational goals do you hold for your students? And here's where I want to take a few minutes for you all to have a moment to do something active. So if you have a notepad close, or you want to bring up a note on your phone, if you want to just think and make a mental list, this is just an opportunity for yourself to be engaging with this. But I want you to think about this question. What long-term goals do you hold for the students in your preschool class? And do some writing on that. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to work on that. I'm going to mute my audio for a second, take a sip of water, and come back to you in 2 minutes. And in 2 minutes, I'm going to invite you all to share any ideas you'd like in the chat, okay? So take about 2 minutes to think and write, and then in 2 minutes, we'll come back and share our ideas in the chat for what future do we want for our students. All righty, so let's see what we've got coming in here. I want them to be successful and have a better life, to speak English with no fear, having a bright future and a safe future. Wow, safety is powerful, right? The safety that can come from the power to do these things. To fall in love with language. That's a really great thing, right? Think about how much that will benefit them in everything they're doing in school. Successful futures, I see a really common. Having the opportunity. I like that, seeing a good person with values. I think about how much preschool is a space where children learn to be together with people outside of their families, right? How that's where we really define what are shared values. How do we as a society choose to be together when we're outside of just the bounds of our family? Want your preschoolers to be happy, right? What power in that? When a student goes home and they think school is a place where I'm happy. That's a child who's got 14 years of really, really great public education free in front of them. Aware of their abilities so that they can dare to dream. Oh, it's moving so fast. You all have so many wonderful ideas. Well, thank
Matt,
you, everyone.
these are beautiful and amazing
Yeah.
comments. Let's capture them someplace and share them with everybody in the future. It's really beautiful to see your aspirations for your students. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that I think is important for me is to have these big picture things, right? To remember them when we're working on the small little steps. Because these goals that we're talking about, right? Becoming a successful person with opportunities and values, imagination, courage, that takes years. These aren't things that any classroom teacher would see develop in 1 year, right? These are things that we as a community of educators work together to foster. And so we can, have that in mind and think, I'm starting this young learner off in this direction, right? This is where we're headed, I think is a really important thing to hold on to. And I see so much beauty in here, and I'm really connecting with you with a lot of this, emotional intelligence and balancing the ability to do things with the ability to be the kind of person who does good things. Because when I think about these big goals, I think that every distance, no matter how great, can be broken down into a path of footsteps. Likewise, any goal, no matter how far off, can be broken down into a sequence of objectives. This is a really powerful metaphor for me that I've been thinking about with students a lot. I really think about the long-term educational journey that a student goes on, how they're going to be in so many different classrooms across so many different years. And when I think about a path that long, right? When I think about what would happen if I tried to walk somewhere far away, I can't just walk in a straight line. If I open the door of my house right now and start walking straight, I get about 15 feet before I hit a wall, right? If I just decide to only walk in one direction, I get stuck rather quick. And so when I think about what a real journey looks like, it's a path that twists and turns. Sometimes it moves a little bit to the right, to the left, it can circle back on itself. And I think that's really important for me in terms of a preschool class, because I've found that watching and observing learning in preschoolers can oftentimes be very nonlinear. I can have little Juan Diego come in on one day and he's answering every question before his classmates. He's speaking in English, he's saying words I didn't even teach him, and I'm feeling like a star teacher. And then on Tuesday, that same young learner can come in and he doesn't want to talk to anybody, right? Maybe his favorite cereal was out and he wasn't able to have breakfast, and he didn't want a tortilla with natilla, and so he didn't eat, and now he's hungry, and that is his world today. And so I really think that image of this footpath that's winding and twisting and turning helps me to be patient with myself and my students when I remember that my big goal for them is straight away in this distance, 18 years away. And then I also remind myself the path to get there isn't straight, right? If my student decides today they want to take a few steps over to the left, even though my plan for them was to move over to the right, that's okay, right? We're going really far away and our paths are all going to be a little bit different. So I want to come back to those big learning objectives, right? We're hoping for things like confidence for our students, for emotional intelligence, for the values of how to interact with one another, to be risk takers and to be motivated, to love language. Those are really big goals. And one thing I want to think about is when we're talking about the objectives of an individual class, students will be able to match the colors of paint to fruits, correctly showing their color, and more or less paint inside the lines. When we match a learning objective like that to those big goals, are we making sure that those two things go together, right? Are the activities and experiences I'm planning today, is the vocabulary that I'm choosing to teach helping to grow students who have good character values, the kinds of values we're trying to grow throughout MEP, right? Because sometimes I know that in my experience as a teacher, when I'm in the moment in a classroom, oftentimes I fall back on my instincts. Things aren't working quite like I planned, and so I react before I think. And so that can sometimes lead me to this impatient teaching, right? Which I think really clashes with preschool, where our learners take time to do what they're doing. And if we really want to let them be the active agents who are in charge of their own learning, we really have to create the time it takes for them to be active. So I think about putting those pieces together, right? And how if my goal is that they're going to be creative and confident, imaginative risk takers, if Elena decides that she wants to paint her banana purple, and I tell her, Elena, bananas aren't purple, is that interaction with Elena helping me reach my big goal? What I wrote in chat was, I hope my learners grow big and strong imaginations, right? I want to live in a place in a world filled with artists who are thinking up creative solutions to our problem. If my classroom is one in which bananas must always be yellow, that we must all see the world exactly the same way, is that serving that long-term goal of growing imagination, right? And more, am I really helping Elena? Does Elena know that bananas are yellow? Is she painting it purple because she thinks it's funny, right? How could I dig into that more? And so I really want to think about those two, because I oftentimes find that in the small scale, my instinctual reaction falls back on my experience that's come from me being a student, which is I want the students doing the activity like the teacher said, right? But when I remember all of those beautiful comments that you all shared, nobody wrote in the chat that they want to help raise students who are obedient, right? We're not looking to the future generation and thinking, yes, the world's challenges are going to be solved by a generation that knows how to obey. And so I want to make sure that when we're thinking about the individual objectives of our class, that our individual objectives are serving those ideals of risk-taking, imagining, creating, interacting, loving, and caring. And now, to bring that idea of goals into the next topic that we're going to talk about, which is phonological and phonemic awareness, I found this piece of research that I think is really powerful and really speaks to the importance of talking about this topic today. And the quote says, "Research confirms that the most common barrier to the acquisition of emergent reading skills is the inability to process phonologically." That's from Snowburns and Griffin, 1998, an oldie but a goodie. I think that's really big. And I know this is a preschool webinar, and I know in preschool, our students won't be reading, right? But this is really speaking to those emergent reading skills. And there's a really important transition in education when we think about that bigger picture of that walking path that our students are moving on. Right around the 3rd grade is when students stop learning to read and they start reading to learn. All those years leading up to that, we're working on letters and sounds and sounding things out, and the books are short, and the story is like, Matt sat on Pat. Pat is a cat. Pat has a hat. Does Matt have a hat? Where there's really no story, right? Where we're really just thinking about letters and sounds. And that process builds up and scaffolds the student up and up and up until about 3rd grade. And right around 3rd grade, more or less around the world, is when we start giving content to our students in a written language. Now we give them a history book and say, read this story about Costa Rica and understand it. Now we give them a handout explaining the scientific process of photosynthesis and say, read about plants and tell me about them. Make a poster, right? That happens in 3rd grade. For me, that's the first major milestone that we as preschool teachers need to be thinking long-term towards. What we're doing in our classroom, Snowburns and Griffin tell us, working on phonology, that is the basic foundation that's going to help our students grow into successful readers. And students who can read proficiently by the time they're 8 are incredibly more likely to graduate high school incredibly more likely to go to college, incredibly more likely to have those opportunities and futures that you were all desiring for them before. So for me, though what we're going to get into with phonology might start very basic, it is because it's that foundational basis on which all of reading is going to come out of. So let's think a little bit more about what phonological awareness is, phonemic awareness is, and how we can take these big fancy words and do something in the classroom with those little ears that helps lead to big learning. And shout out to the 18 people watching on Facebook Live. That's putting us close to 300. See, I'm not gonna have to lie to my mom. This is great. Hi, all 300 of you. It's nice to still have you out there. So, phonemic and phonological awareness, learning how and what we hear. This is a little image from my preschool class that I run out of Centro Espiral Maná. I've been running a preschool program there at our school for the past 3 years, and teaching and working in La Fortuna for about 4 years now. And these are my students doing a role play where they're going to the supermarket and spending 100 colones to buy. Right there, I see buying grapes. And one quick note I want to mention, I'm sharing, and I'll keep sharing a lot of pictures of my students. I think not being able to be in the classroom, at least for me, has taken all of that bright sunshine that those little kids and the funny things they say fills my life with. And so I wanted to share some of that with us and remind us what that looks like. I also want to mention that all of these students have given me written and signed permission from their parents to use their images in a situation like this. I think as educators working with very young learners, it's important that we remember that times are changing and that what it means to put a photo of someone's child on the internet might not hit every single person the same. You might have parents that have no problem with it, right? When I give them that sheet, some parents sign it right away and some parents really hesitate. But when I explain that, oh, I want to do it so I can interact with teachers around the country and share ideas that I'm experimenting with in my classroom, that's what gets my parents to, or the parents of my students, not my parents, to sign. But I did want to mention that as we're all thinking about how to be teachers in this digital age, that I do have that. And it's an important thing to think about in terms of keeping ourselves in comfortable situations. So I'd like to now do a quiz. I'm not going to grade you. I'm not going to check in with you and see exactly how many questions you got right. We're going to review our key terms. So I've got 2 questions for you. I want you to choose all of the definitions that match this term. So the first term we're working with is phonological awareness. What is phonological awareness? Is it knowing that every letter makes a sound? Is it the ability to recognize and work with sounds in a spoken language? Is it C, the foundation for learning to read? It could be 1, 2, or all 3. So take a quick 15, 20 seconds to think on that and decide which letters you think it is. If you want to post what answer you think it is in chat, you're welcome to. And then I will share with you my answers in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people. There's a few people saying 1. Most people are saying all of them. This is where in a classroom, I'm going to tell you something different than what you've told me. But as a teacher, I would give you all credit for saying all of them on the test. I think you're showing me. For me, phonological awareness focuses on B and C. I think those are the most specific definitions. Absolutely, the ability to recognize and work with sounds in a spoken language is the broad definition, right? And as that quote just established, it is the foundation for learning to read. Knowing that every letter makes a sound is a part of phonological awareness, but it's not the whole thing, right? It's like the square and rectangle thing. Some piece of this big topic that is phonological awareness is knowing that every letter makes a sound, but there are also pieces of phonological awareness that don't connect with that. So you're right, it is very integral to this topic, but it's not how I would define this term. And that's because I have one more question for you, which is phonemic awareness. So the same way, I want you to choose all the definitions now that match phonemic awareness. And is that the ability to recognize and manipulate the spoken parts of words, a technical linguistic term for good pronunciation, or the foundation for learning to read? So again, take a quick 15 seconds. What do you think is phonemic awareness? So it's definitely about sounds. Lots of people saying A, some people saying C, a few Bs. I have it as A and C. So again, for me, A is the textbook definition I found of this term. Phonemic awareness is the ability to recognize and manipulate the spoken parts of words. It's very similar to what we're working at with here, but that action verb becomes more specific. In phonological awareness, we just are working with sounds. And here we're manipulating the parts of words. So it's a more focused in specific definition. Phonemic awareness is inside of phonology. And it's also the foundation for learning to read. It is a skill that could help with good pronunciation, but when I think of pronunciation, I'm really thinking about production, right? If I'm going to evaluate a student's production, evaluate their pronunciation, I'm evaluating their speaking. And I want to remind you that both of these are awarenesses. They start well before production. They start with the student just becoming aware, and how we can bring our students' attention and those eyes that want to travel all over the room, and those hands that want to touch everything in our classroom and everything they can have around them, and just try and put it in their mouth just to see how it feels against their teeth. How do we get that attention on these auditory elements that are necessary for a language? To think more about that relation of these, I found this really nice image. So phonological awareness is this big umbrella. It's a big term with a lot of different pieces inside of it. When our students are learning and working on phonological awareness, they're learning about the words and sentences. They're working on onset rhymes, hat, cat, pat, mat, or just that onset letter changes. They're thinking about the syllables, banana, about rhyme and alliteration, pretty purple, pretty petals. And then on that other side, you have one drop with its own 4 droplets. And that big drop is phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness is its own category under this umbrella. Inside of phonemic awareness, we get to really specific linguistic awarenesses like isolation, blending, segmenting, adding, deleting, and subtracting sounds. This is really where it becomes like the math of speaking, where we're breaking up each piece, normally along letters, but sometimes along chunks of letters, but really focusing on the phonemic elements, the sounds of them, right? And that's that biggest area within phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is the broader construct for knowing speech sounds, rhyming, and alliteration, and includes phonemic awareness. I think of it really basically. For me, phonological awareness is just my students getting better at learning how to hear, right? I'm getting their attention focused on those little ears and practicing using them. Because the process of hearing is a physical process, right? And there are elements towards listening and hearing and being heard that our students need to learn, down to the mechanics of, Eduardo, if you're going to tell me a story about going to the circus on the weekend, I need you to look at me. Because if you look away and run towards the jungle gym while you're telling me, I can't hear you, right? So phonological awareness is that broad term that's just learning how to listen. And phonemic awareness is when it specifically focuses on individual sounds. B, k, p. That's that difference for me. So just that very broad listening to the very specific awareness of named sounds. I want to talk about sequence, right? Because when we have lots of different topics, I think the question that comes up to me as a teacher is, okay, what do I do with it in the classroom? How do I make this learning that comes to life and makes my students active learning agents? And more importantly, what do I do first? What do I do next? What should I not do because it's too hard? So I found this clear image. It's from the National Reading Panel in the United States, which again highlights how educators who are focused on reading really get their studies digging all the way back to phonology because they see how much of a basis it is. And so we see this staircase where something like rhyming songs, like Baby Shark, are that most base level, right? And then we start building up to sentence segmentation, breaking up a big sentence into chunks, then working with individual syllables, onset rhyming where we start getting the specific sounds, and then blending and segmenting individual phonemes. So again, this says that we're starting with big general pieces and moving down into the more specific. Our students might listen to Baby Shark hundreds of times, and their comprehension of that song might be, esa canción se trata de tiburones, right? That might have thousands and thousands of minutes, right? 50 to 100 hours listening to Baby Shark. And their comprehension of it is, se trata de tiburones, muevo mis manos así, y mi papá se da risa, right? And that's okay. That is showing comprehension because it is a song about sharks. And socially, there is a construct where you move your hands and do the action. And so the student comprehension is because they're focusing on such a big piece of language. So their understanding is rightfully very general. And then as we move up that staircase, it starts becoming more and more specific. Now, I want to make a specific note about this because when I see something like this, my first reaction as a teacher is, amazing. This is perfect. Now I know exactly what to do. During the first month of school, I'll do rhyming songs. During the second month of school, I'll do sentence segmentation. The third month, and then as I start thinking about it more and thinking about the complexity, I realize I don't think it can be that simple. One of the realities of a preschool classroom is even because our students are so young, the diversity of age that we have is way more extreme. In preschool, I might have one student who is 3 years old and another student who's just turned 6 years old in the same classroom. That might not be true for your classrooms, and maybe it's true for one of the classes. Maybe you teach a weekend class, and that is true when you're doing just English lessons. But I've found that across different preschool teaching environments, you can get an age range of about 2 or 3 years that seems pretty acceptable. Now, when I think about those students, the difference between a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old is half of a life, right? That 6-year-old is twice as old as the 3-year-old. It would be like having a high school classroom where you've got 15-year-olds and 30-year-olds, right? And the 30-year-old isn't the teacher, they're half the students. And even more, the difference cognitively and developmentally, when we're looking at those early years, it's not linear, right? It's exponential, the amount that the brain changes in those first years of life. And so when I'm thinking about the diversity of my classroom, preschool classes can be some of the most diverse in terms of cognitive ability. And so when I think about how this sequence applies to my classroom, I need to be thinking about the different ages and cognitive abilities of my students and what levels of complexity might serve each of them. I might have some of my students for whom rhyming songs is about as complex as they're at in English in terms of interacting actively and showing me their phonological awareness. And I might have older students who could already play games with onset rhyming. And so I need to create a diversity of experiences in each classroom so that the diverse cognitive abilities of my students are all being met. Alrighty, I went a little bit over my 20 minutes, but we're hitting on another stretch break. So I'm gonna take a sip of water and move on to the next slide, but take some time, move your body around, look away from a screen at least 7 meters away for 20 seconds. Your optometrist and doctor and those that love you will thank me, and we'll keep going. So here's what I think of when I think of the phonological and phonemic awareness sequence and how it connects to literacy. So everything we've been talking about so far, ooh, I can draw on it, yes. Everything we've been talking about so far has been over here on this side of it, right? This over here is where we start with phonological awareness and just learning basically to hear. And we start getting more and more specific until we get to an individual sound like eh, right there. Sorry, my handwriting's a little tough. I'm trying not to run the slide. So first, preschoolers begin focusing on large chunks of auditory input. We're doing songs, chants, stories, right? You might have a piece of classroom language that your student learns entirely. In one of my first classrooms, my students learned to say the entire phrase, take off your shoes and get a foam. Take off your shoes and get a foam. 8 words. Now for them, it was one chunk, right? I don't think they knew what the word foam meant right away. And they might not be 100% on take off, but they knew the action that correlated with that whole chunk. Take off your shoes and get a foam meant quitarse los zapatos, vaya allá, guarde sus zapatos, intenta no empujar sus compañeros, devuelve con una alfombra, póngalo en un círculo, siéntate y espere, right? They knew all of that action connects with take off your shoes and get a foam. So we start over here in phonological awareness with these really large chunks of language. As the student gets older, moving in this direction, they start focusing on smaller chunks, individual words, individual sounds. That triangle's getting smaller and focusing in. And that's right about when we start working with this concept of phonemic awareness. What does each individual sound mean? Now this middle line here is really crucial, right? Because everything over here is auditory. And everything over here starts to become visual, right? Over here, we're working with sounds and what we can hear. And over here, we're working with letters and what we can read and write. And this line is really important because when we think about it with the MEP curriculum, there's a strong divide here between what we're working with in preschool and what we're working with in elementary school. And the preschool curriculum, the new curriculum that we're working with, has us focusing and thinking long-term towards literacy. But what we're doing in the classroom is phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. We're really being asked to focus on the auditory side of this and get our students ready. This is a moment that it is really important for the elementary school teachers who are with us, who are thinking about how to adapt their skills into a classroom environment. And again, I want to come back to, that's the journey I made. I went from having many, close to 7 or 8 years working in elementary school education contexts to being a brand new in preschool. And so to trying taking and saying, what works with 7-year-olds? How can I do it with 4-year-olds? So I want to speak to what you might be going through that and share with you my experience. I found that for the longest time, I was relying way too much on letters and the written word. That my students weren't there, right? Where my students are at in their learning in preschool, they're over here. They're thinking about how things are sounding. And so even if I, on their worksheet, write, hello, they might not be ready for those letter inputs, right? They might still be focusing on other awarenesses. And so I was spending time and energy trying to get my students in preschool to work with this. And it became frustrating. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it because I was giving them a task that was reading and writing, right? What letter is this? What sound does it make? That's elementary school. So I want to bring this up to say that for the rest of this, we're going to be thinking primarily about how to do this auditorily. In some of the pictures, you will see my students holding handouts that have language written on them. Whenever I type something on a handout, I'm writing to that student's parent. I design all of the art projects and worksheets that I make to be able to be taken home and used by mom or dad or grandma or tia or cousin or brother or sister as a way to practice with a young student, with one of my preschoolers. So if I'm going to write English on them, on that worksheet, I'm writing so that that cousin, who is a tour guide, can practice with his 3-year-old cousin. And the writing that I'm doing is writing to them. Now, I don't write it out and say, dear cousin, mom, aunt, or, right? It just says the words. Maybe it's a worksheet you'll see later that says apple, banana. But I remember these words aren't specifically for my young learners. Now, it's good for them to be seeing letters, to know that we have this complicated system of signs that make sounds and make words and make meaning. But it's also important to remember that that doesn't mean anything more to them yet. And that it's really important that we focus here on the left with the basic phonological awarenesses and spend a good amount of time, all of preschool, working with phonemic awareness as an auditory skill so that our students have really sharp ears and can use that strong foundation to become strong readers in elementary school. So here you can see Isabella, Redania, Lucia, Valentina, and other Valentina. The magic of a preschool class. No matter how big or small it is, you always have 2 students with the same name. It's a beautiful thing. And I love it because at 3 or 4 years old, that's just great. Tocayo, right? It's no problem. It's no, I need to be Valentina V. It's just, okay, I'm Valentina, you're Valentina. Would you like to play with my pony? Ah, I miss them. So, phonological awareness, the ability to work with sounds in a spoken language. I'd like to take that definition and pull it apart a little bit. The ability to work with sounds in a spoken language. What do we mean when we say these words? Let's get more specific. When we're thinking about what kinds of work that our preschoolers can do to be active participants and active learners in their phonological awareness, I'm mainly thinking about these broad categories of recognition and production. How can I get my students to recognize and demonstrate recognition of sounds? And how can I get them to start producing those sounds? Again, knowing that my focus is going to be over here on recognition, right? Production is really just one way to show that because we're talking about awareness, right? I want my students to start producing and everything, but the first step is going to be recognizing sounds. And the second step might be manipulating their own voice. And again, we're still thinking about sounds, right? So these could be songs, sentences, words, first, middle, last phonemes. It could also be other things. It could be a dog barking. It could be a car horn honking. It could be the sound of a microwave dinging to tell you that it's done. The sound of a phone vibrating on a table. The sound of a car horn honking angrily behind you. All of those sounds communicate meaning. And as adults working in our lives, we need to know how to pay attention to those sounds and decipher meaning. And that's what we're working with here, right? It's deeper than just song, sentences, and words. It's just sounds. And connected then to a spoken language, right? That there's this piece of just hearing sounds, and then it ties back into how that becomes part of a shared language. Now, if we want to get deep into linguistics, I could argue that honking a car horn is a language with just one word, but I don't know if we have time for that. Maybe that's a topic for the chat during the break. But when I am thinking about spoken languages, it is important to acknowledge that yes, we have Spanish and English. We also have Maleku and Cabekar and Bribri and Guaymi. I don't know how to pronounce that one. If someone can help me out in the chat with something typed up, that way. And Buglere, that one's new for me too. But for me, thinking about this multiplicity of language is super important. I want to come back to the fact that one of the groups making it possible for us to be here, and one of the parts of this system of education that's working to help empower us, to empower students, is ABI, right? The Alliance for Bilingualism. And bilingualism doesn't mean that we teach English. Bilingualism means that we create opportunities for students to develop multiple languages. In your classroom, that might be English, but bilingual and multilingual students have skills from all of these different areas of their linguistic brain that transfer, right? I think this is an especially important topic too to think about as preschool teachers who are thinking, how can I do this with all of my students working from home? Because phonological and phonemic awareness are necessarily auditorial, right? And if I'm teaching in a rural context, like Mary was talking about earlier, and I don't have consistent access to technology with my students, I can't just send home an audio to every one of them, right? It might be hard for me to give my students activities to interact with audio if I don't have the technological bridge. Why me? Thank you, Linda. I'm going to work on that and Google it during the break. But that right there that I'm doing, that's trying to sound out new words, trying to listen to sounds and mimic them, doing that in one language is a transferable skill. A student who is working on phonological awareness, primarily in Spanish with their parents, is still developing tons of skills that they're going to need to listen and be successful in learning English as well, and in learning Maleku and Bribri as well, right? So this side of this, and that's why today I really wanted to separate phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. You're right. It might be hard or near impossible to teach the phoneme TH that goes, and to teach that in the house with zero technology. To design one sheet of paper that explains exactly how to go is going to be really, really challenging, especially if there's no one in the home with an English language ability to facilitate that. Because our learners are young enough that they need their at-home learning to be facilitated for them. So in a moment when we talk more about phonemic awareness, there might be pieces of phonemic awareness that because of the realities of your context, you might not be able to do in a take-home manner, right? There are some things that we just need some kind of technological access to audio or otherwise a proficient language speaker to have access to these phonemes. But this whole bubble of phonological awareness is something that anyone can do at home, right? Regardless of what language or languages are spoken and not spoken in the home, every single parent and child can interact in activities and develop phonological awarenesses. So I want to talk about what that looks like so we can think about how we might design some of those. So let's try some activities. I'm going to share with you some activities that I've tried from my own practice I also want to share with you some activities that I've found doing some research on Google and from some of those digital resources. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to give you all of the instructions and then I'll say go. And you'll see why in just a second. So please don't do anything until I say go. I want all of you to be sound explorers. When I say go, I'm going to ask you to, if you're wearing headphones, take out your headphones. And I want you to spend 30 seconds, when I say go, just listening to all of the sounds you can hear around you. If you hear a dog barking or a bird chirping, if you hear your significant other brushing their teeth, if you hear your dad eating cereal in the kitchen, whatever it might be, you're going to spend 30 seconds just listening for sounds, okay? And when at the end, we'll share the sounds that we heard. So take 30 seconds, listen for the sounds, and after about 30 seconds, please put your headphones back in or you won't hear the next instruction. So take your headphones out and listen for whatever sounds you can hear. Ten more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Tati heard me drinking water. I'm sorry, I'm sharing my screen. Yeah, if you could please start sharing what you hear in the chat. I'd love that as like a cute little window into where everyone is and what's around people. People talking, a radio's on, TVs, cars. You heard the winds, some birds chirping. Ooh, a lot of birds are around. It's about that time to get some. Got a washing machine going, parents talking. Yeah, my dad called his water in the other room. Sorry, that was me drinking water. I'm sorry. One technical hurdle I'm still trying to get over is when I'm sharing my screen in Zoom, I don't have the ability to mute my audio. So I tried to drink very quietly and it didn't work, but I decided drinking water was better than coughing in front of you. So that right there is phonological awareness, right? Just listening. And I read that activity online and I thought, wow, I've never done something just that basic in class, but I really like it, right? I think an activity like that really taps into the fundamental nature of listening, right? Gets our students playing with the mechanics. A student who's given time to just try and listen quietly is gonna start turning their head. And they're gonna notice that they can hear better when they're facing in different directions, right? And they're going to start thinking about how to hear auditory input and make meaning of that, and then express that. Now, obviously, a student wouldn't be typing into a chat, they'd be saying it aloud. But something else I really like about that activity is it's really open, right? It's possible to do that activity and say, okay, what did you hear? And one student can say, dog. And another student can say, yo escuché un pajarito y en mi casa tengo un pajarito así, es súper pequeño y una vez se cae. And another student can just sit there and be quiet. And so there's also a lot of different paths through that activity for students to interact with on different cognitive levels. Okay, here's another activity we're gonna try. If you'd like, this one's based on movement. I can't see you, so again, I'm gonna trust that you're gonna do it. So the competition aspect of this isn't going to work. You're going to be listening to a number of animal sounds. When you hear the dog bark, I want you to raise your hand, okay? You're going to hear animal sounds. When you hear the dog bark, raise your hand. If you hear a different animal, don't do anything, okay? Okay, that's the point where I'd imagine to see a lot of you raising your hands. If you didn't hear a dog barking, please reach out in chat. I definitely made a dog barking sound. That means that your audio wasn't quite working. I've seen people write in chat, so that's good. I'm sure my father is in the other room wondering after I told him how serious this work was that I'm just in here making animal sounds. But again, I'm now tuning my students' attention onto specific sounds, right? My instructions give a target. They're listening for a dog. And now my student is there and they're trying to focus their attention. Because even just that, focusing your attention on a task, is something our students are developing, right? Remember that we say that more or less every year old a child is a minute of attention they can spend doing the same task. So little Jimena right there, who's 3 years old, she's got about 3 minutes of attention before her mind decides it wants new stimulation, right? That's her brain saying, I need to learn about new things. So both of those activities show different ways where I'm focusing my students on sound and getting them to do something with it. And neither one of them involve my students speaking. The first one could, but not necessarily. So there's space for production around phonological awareness, but it's not necessary. And we're focusing on really basic things, right? And those are activities that a parent could do with a child without speaking any English. And that process, even if it doesn't feel like it, I think one powerful thing that we can all help our parents understand is you can help your child learn English even if you don't speak English. This phonological awareness is how. And I've seen that overwhelming feeling of my parents who want to do everything they can to support their children's learning, right? And so I think having a bank of activities like this and an understanding of how to create them can help us support those parents too, who are at home thinking, yo no hablo inglés, pero deseo tanto apoyar a mi hijo a aprender, right? That we can create activities and that this can then branch into phonemic awareness in contexts where the student does have access to that. We're a little behind on time. I was gonna have you think about one of those sounds you heard and create an activity, right? Just thinking, oh, right here in this moment, I hear birds chirping. Maybe I'll have my students listen and count to 10 different birds chirping. And as soon as they've heard 10 different bird chirps, then they raise their hand. Or they use a crayon and mark on a paper every time they hear a bird chirp, and we count the bird chirps kind of thing. I'm gonna skip that moment for now, and we'll have a little opportunity for y'all to get creative in a moment. Because I also wanna talk about phonemic awareness, which is the ability to recognize and manipulate sounds in a spoken language. Here you see 3 of my students, Maria Angel, Jimena, and Ana Belén, and they're jumping from number to number and saying the numbers as they pass by them. And Iker is watching on curiously. And you know, I chose this picture thinking about how an activity like this could be a phonemic awareness activity, right? It was hard for me to find pictures for this slide. And for most of these slides in general, because we're talking about something auditory. And 2 people talking doesn't make a good picture. Their mouths are open, their eyes look weird because they're focusing on speaking, right? The good pictures are when students are painting and they're smiling and they're this and they're that. But when I looked at this picture and thought more deeply and thought, is there phonemic awareness being taught here? And I do think about how one of the things that I focus on in terms of phonemic awareness with my preschoolers is that number 3 right there, right? That TH sound we were working with earlier. And how an activity like this, where I leave these numbers up in my classroom all the time, so that if my students get distracted or they get antsy and energetic and they need to get up and move, that they can get up and move and just go to that wall and jump and do numbers, right? I know my preschoolers are going to get distracted, and so I want to fill my classroom with distractions in English so that when they do get distracted, their distraction is, oh, I'm going to go practice the numbers and jump. So I can take this that's present in my classroom every day and say, okay, every time you get to the 3, I want you to spin around in a circle and go 3 times. And now this same activity is added this one extra layer to focus on a specific phoneme. Let's work with the definition so we can see how that is working on phonemic awareness in a way that's more specific and guided than what we were just talking about with phonological awareness. So phonemic awareness, the ability to recognize and manipulate sounds in a spoken language. Well, what we've got is the same as that spoken language piece, right? There are elements of this that also connect with Spanish, English, Maleku, Karekar, Bri Bri, Wayami, Waimi, there's no vowel there, Waimi, and Buglere. All of those have phonemes, right? We can study English and say how many phonemes and what phonemes exist in English. What phonemes exist in Spanish, right? What individual sounds are there? So every language has a collection of phonemes. And a lot of these languages share tons of phonemes. Spanish and English have more phonemic similarity than difference, right? Think about how many sounds are unique. You got the TH and the R, and the Nye, Ny. There's some vowel sounds. But in general, most of the phonemes that we're talking about are going to be more or less the same between those two. And that means that even when it's time to work on phonemic awareness, if I'm trying to create an at-home learning experience guided by an adult who doesn't speak English, I can still create activities based around the phonemes of Spanish that I know translate to English. Because inside of the student's mind, they're still processing that like verbal sound. They're still getting enriched out of that and developing their abilities. It might mean that once we move away from this at-home learning model as a primary source of education, I have to come back and spend more time on the phonemes that are exclusive to English, right? Maybe next year when I'm teaching in class, I think my student has probably had extra exposure to Spanish phonemes because they were speaking Spanish at home with mom and dad, and a little bit less exposure to these English phonemes. So for this student, I want to focus on this, this, and this phoneme sound. So that's one piece. The other element of this definition that I want to come back up to is the top. The ability to recognize and manipulate sounds. If we go back to the other definition, we don't have that specific of an action verb. It's just work. And I think that's a really important difference. Phonemic awareness gets down to these really specific actions that our learners are taking, right? That's why we tend to think about the foundation being phonological awareness. Because typically our students are in that silent period. They're working on phonology and just learning how to hear, and they're silent. And then after a good amount of time, that's when they start to speak and manipulate those sounds. And that recognition and manipulation can take many forms. They can be identifying sounds. Which of these words has a B? I'm going to say 3 words. Tell me which word has B, B. Girl, boy, mom. Boy. Boy has B, B, right? That's an identification of a sound, right? Differentiation. I'm going to say 3 words. One of them doesn't have a B. Tell me which one doesn't have a B. Ball, bowl, cup. Yeah, cup doesn't have a B, B. So there, the student is differentiating. They're choosing between 2 different sounds and saying, oh, I heard that as a starting sound, and that was a different one. Isolation, right? What's the first sound in the word ball? Ball. I'm really having them to focus in and break that one piece off. Categorization. Hey, Melissa, I want you to look at all of these picture cards. These picture cards either start with a B, B, or a K, K. I want you to put the words that start with B, B, the pictures, over here. And I want you to put the pictures that start with K, K over here. That would be categorization. Segmentation, we're thinking about working with syllables and breaking things up. right? Or on a sentence level, breaking up the words in a longer chunk, right? Maybe I go through slowly and say, take off your shoes and get a phone. And I take a big chunk of language that my students say as one piece, right? Maybe my students are really good at saying, fine, thanks, and you. And they say that chunk of language like it's one word. Maybe I want to work on some word segmentation to break that up, right? Making sure that my student is aware, where are the spaces in that sentence? Where do I take a breath? Where do I pause? Deleting letters, right? I'm going to say a word and I want you to repeat it without the first sound. Mat, at, cup, up. And then blending, right? Where we're putting phonemes together. Ish, fish. And then all of that tied into production. I think it's important to isolate production here and separate it out because it's possible that students can show their ability to identify or differentiate or isolate without necessarily producing, right? When I asked that student, Melissa, to sort picture cards, she's able to show me the awareness of categorizing phonemes without producing any language. And I think that's really important. Again, for the elementary teachers. And I think this is something you even still see in early elementary school and beyond, right? I think this is a lesson that my preschool experience has taught me that's helped me with every other age. Because even adults sometimes are nervous to share. And so when I can create moments that my students demonstrate awareness and understanding without having to produce verbal language, I get more information. Yes, some moments I want to ask them to speak it, and some moments I don't. So let's try some activities. One of my favorite activities, and it's something I start with in every class, I play the guitar. I've written a song that's hello. I don't have a guitar here in California, unfortunately, so I can't play it for you today. But I always start before that with warming up our voice. And so I'll do a warm-up and my students will repeat after me. So I'm going to do the warm-up that I do, and I want you to repeat after me. Okay? Me, 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 me. My, 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 my. Mo, 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 mo. Ma, 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 ma. Ma, 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 ma. Moo, 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 moo. Moo. Okay, let's sing. So that's a quick activity that I do at the beginning of every one of my classes just to get my students working on hearing, noticing, and starting to produce different vowel sounds. If we go back here, what I'm doing is I'm isolating the vowel sound there. Every single thing I'm saying is M followed by a vowel. And so my students are starting to focus on that difference. Because I've chosen to isolate that sound, my students are now working on identification, differentiation, and even production. So something that simple is getting my students listening for that specific phoneme, right? That's what's getting them there. So in terms of developing phonological awareness activities, those blue slides we were looking at earlier, think of this as helping your students learn to hear better, right? Little ears, big learning. Our students' ears are growing and we're helping them learn to hear. Ask yourself, how can your students show recognition without production? For more clarity, focus on one sound. It's easier cognitively for a student to do work with just one different sound than with lots of different sounds, right? And to add more complexity, mix together different sounds, right? That's kind of that dial that we get to move to decide how complicated we want to make each activity. And this is actually going to come back, I think, a little bit more for phonemic awareness, but when isolating parts of a word, remember beginning, end, middle. That's out of order on purpose there. It's not supposed to say beginning, middle, end. It's supposed to say beginning, end, middle. The easiest phoneme to isolate for young learners is the beginning phoneme, to hear that. The second easiest phoneme or part of a word for a student to identify auditorily is the ending sound. And the most challenging type of isolation and identification for a student to make on a part of a word is the middle sound. So if I'm thinking about planning over time, I want to see that all of my students are really good at doing activities where they're recognizing, differentiating, and isolating those beginning sounds. And then once my class has that skill, then we move on to ending sounds. Then we move on to middle sounds. In terms of phonemic awareness, we really want to explicitly label sounds and show how you make them with the mouth. There is a lot of research done around this. Is this something students will just learn naturally? And the answer is yes and no. A student might learn to speak naturally, right? They might learn to make all of these sounds if they're just given enough time and patience to learn. But one important thing for that success in school that we talked about earlier is that a student can interact in an academic setting. And being able to talk about sounds and to talk about the parts of words is a skill that our students need, right? So putting a sound on that, right? Putting a name and saying, this is the b sound. Maybe I'm not calling it B yet, or be, but I'm still saying the b sound. And in that act, naming it. That explicit instruction does help here. Try to make it a positive and playful experience, right? How could your student design clothing and make them a clothing designer? And now you're having them listen for shirt, skirt, shirt, skirt, and they're focusing on that middle sound. Okay, shirt, shoes, shirt, shoes, shorts. Use a variety of input to engage students' curiosity. This is true in all teaching, but especially here when we're thinking about really tuning in the ear, we want to make sure we're mixing together songs and poems and lots of different auditory input. And with older students, I'm thinking 5 or 6 years old, focus explicit instruction on the phonemes exclusive to English. A student who's reaching 5 or 6 years is likely reaching basic fluency in Spanish or whatever their first language is. So if you know that and recognize that in your student, you can see that that student can focus on just the sound and the vowels new because of adding English as an additive bilingualism on top. Really quickly, I'm going to show you some handouts that you'll have access to. This is a chart of different categories of phonological and phonemic awareness and examples of activities you can do inside of each one. So these can be applied onto all different types of phonemes. And this is a PDF already in that Google Drive. There's also this PDF, which has a bunch of links. And each one says what it links to. There's an article about phonological skills that connects them to ages. There's a whole take-home curriculum. This second link is really great. If you're looking at designing take-home materials for parents, there's a full curriculum here. It's designed for parents who speak English doing this in a first language setting. So a lot of these materials will need to be adapted and brought to your context, but I think they're really, really great materials to start with. There's some list of apps, a little talk more about multisensory mapping, which is how in working on phonemic and phonological awareness, if we engage our students' other senses, they're going to remember better. And then some example games to take home. So I think we have about 5 minutes left. What I want to get covered is questions, and then also making sure we have time to take our photo and do the attendance work. So I'm going to move forward to the attendance piece, and then we can come back for questions as we start our. So we have 2 quick tasks to help us with attendance. It's time for a group photo. So we're going to ask everyone to turn on your video and smile. If you want to take a quick 10 seconds and fix your hair really quick, you're welcome to, but we'd like to take some screenshots of everyone present here. Having images like that helps us show Abby and the embassy and the president's office and all MEP and everyone else that we're collaborating with, the wonderful work that we are doing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. No. I'm going to turn on my video, fix my hair.
And we need everybody to hold your smile. We have 12 pages of people here. That's amazing and beautiful. So hold your smiles for a while, because we're going to take all 12 photos of all 12 pages. So just keep smiling.